Jake Thompson was not the kind of kid anyone would expect to save the galaxy. At 14 years old, he lived a pretty normal life in a small town in Ohio. His days were filled with video games, comic books, and daydreams about exploring space. Jake loved imagining himself as a brave astronaut or a fearless starship captain. But deep down, he knew those dreams were just that. Dreams. He wasn't special. He wasn't strong like the heroes in his favorite movies. He was just an average kid who liked pizza and hated math homework. One sunny afternoon, Jake was sitting in his backyard lazily tossing a baseball into the air. His little sister, Lily, was chasing butterflies near the fence, giggling loudly. Their mom had sent them outside to get some fresh air, though Jake suspected she mostly wanted a break from their constant arguing over the TV remote. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until something strange happened. A sudden flash of light lit up the sky. Jake shielded his eyes, squinting at what looked like a glowing silver disk descending from the clouds. It hovered silently above the trees, spinning, slowly as if it were searching for something or someone. Before Jake could even think to run inside and tell his mom, the object shot forward, landing with a soft thud in the middle of the yard. Lily screamed, dropping the butterfly net she'd been holding. Jake froze, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. The disc unfolded itself, revealing two figures stepping out. One was tall and reptilian, its scaly green skin shimmering in the sunlight. Its wide, unblinking eyes scanned the area before settling on Jake. The other figure was smaller, round and floating slightly above the ground. It didn't have arms or legs, but instead pulsed with a faint blue light, almost like it was alive. "Greetings, human," said the reptilian creature in a low, gravelly voice. "We are representatives of the Galactic Union." Jake blinked, unsure if he was hallucinating. Did this thing just talk? And why did it sound so serious? Hi?" he managed to stammer, clutching the baseball tightly in his hand. The floating orb chimed softly, producing a series of melodic tones that somehow translated into words inside Jake's head. "You have been selected for participation in our intergalactic defense initiative," it explained. "Your presence is required immediately." "What? Me?" Jake pointed at himself, incredulous. "Why me? I'm nobody." The reptile tilted, its head studying him curiously. "Your potential has been identified. You will serve as Earth's representative in our training program." Jake opened his mouth to protest, but before he could say anything, the orb emitted a bright beam of light that engulfed him completely. He felt weightless, as if he were being pulled through a tunnel at impossible speed. When the sensation finally stopped, he found himself standing in a completely different place. A vast, metallic room filled with strange equipment and alien symbols etched into the walls. Panic set in as Jake realized he was no longer in his backyard. There was no sign of Lily, his mom, or anything familiar. Instead, dozens of aliens bustled around him, each more bizarre than the last. Some walked on 6 legs, while others floated like jellyfish. A few even had multiple heads or glowing appendages that flickered like neon lights. Before Jake could process what was happening, the reptilian alien stepped closer. "Welcome to the Intergalactic Defense Academy," it said. "I am Zixar, your commanding officer. This is Vive." It gestured toward the floating orb, which chimed cheerfully. "You will undergo rigorous training to prepare you for service in the Galactic Union." Jake shook his head, trying to make sense of everything. Wait, I'm only 14. I can't join some alien army. My parents don't even know I'm here." Zixar's expression didn't change. "Age is irrelevant. Potential is all that matters. Your planet has been chosen for inclusion in our alliance. If Earth wishes to survive, it must contribute." But, Jake sputtered, feeling utterly helpless. How could this be happening? He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't brave or smart or anything remotely useful. He was just a kid who liked playing video games and eating snacks after school. Despite his protests, Zixar ignored him and led him down a long corridor. Along the way, Jake caught glimpses of other recruits, aliens of all shapes and sizes wearing matching gray uniforms. They looked tough, disciplined, and nothing like him. He felt like a fish out of water, except worse because he wasn't even sure how he'd ended up in this situation. Eventually, they arrived at a large chamber where rows of bunk beds lined the walls. Aliens milled about, chatting in languages Jake couldn't understand. Zixar handed him a uniform and instructed him to change. "Training begins at dawn," it said flatly before leaving him alone. Jake sat down heavily on one of the bunks, staring at the unfamiliar clothes in his hands. His mind raced with questions. Would he ever see his family again? What exactly was expected of him? And most importantly, how was he supposed to survive in a place where everyone else seemed so much stronger and smarter? As night fell, Jake lay awake, listening to the hum of alien voices around him. For the first time in his life, he felt truly small, not just physically, but in every possible way. Yet somewhere deep inside, buried beneath layers of fear and confusion, a tiny spark of curiosity began to flicker. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than he'd ever realized. Only time would tell whether that spark would grow into something brighter, or burn out entirely. The next morning, Jake woke up to the sound of a loud horn blaring through the chamber. It was so sudden and sharp that he nearly fell off his bunk. All around him, aliens sprang into action, grabbing their gear and rushing toward the door. Jake scrambled to pull on his uniform, which felt awkward and stiff against his skin. He didn't want to be left behind, so he hurried after the crowd, feeling like a tiny fish swimming upstream in a river full of sharks. When he stepped outside, he found himself in a massive courtyard surrounded by towering metal walls. Dozens of recruits were already lined up in neat rows, standing perfectly still as if they'd been doing this their whole lives. Jake quickly joined the nearest line, trying to mimic their posture. His heart raced as he glanced around, wondering what kind of training awaited him. At the front of the group stood Commander Tarka, an enormous insectoid creature with razor-sharp mandibles and glowing red eyes. Its body was covered in shiny black armor, and its voice boomed like thunder when it spoke. "Welcome to your first day at the Intergalactic Defense Academy," it announced, pacing back and forth. "Here, weakness will not be tolerated. Failure will not be forgiven. You are here to prove yourselves worthy of serving the Galactic Union." Jake swallowed hard, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. This didn't sound good. The commander wasted no time getting started. The first exercise involved running laps around the courtyard while carrying heavy packs filled with alien equipment. Jake struggled to keep up, his legs burning and his lungs gasping for air. Many of the other recruits moved effortlessly, their bodies clearly built for endurance. By the time the whistle blew to signal the end of the drill, Jake was drenched, in sweat and barely able to stand. As he collapsed onto the ground panting, one of the recruits, a tall, muscular alien with shimmering blue scales, snickered loudly. "Look at this one," it said, pointing at Jake. "He can't even run without falling over. How did Earth send such a weakling?" Jake's face turned red with embarrassment, but before he could respond, another recruit stepped forward. She was shorter than most of the others, with fiery orange hair and piercing green eyes. Her name was Kira, and she came from a desert planet where survival depended on strength and cunning. "Leave him alone," she snapped at the blue-scaled alien. "Not everyone grows up fighting wars." Her words surprised Jake. No one had ever stuck up for him like that before. For a moment, he felt a flicker of gratitude, but it quickly faded as the next challenge began. This time, the recruits were split into teams and tasked with navigating an obstacle course designed to test their agility and teamwork. The course included climbing walls, swinging across gaps on ropes, and dodging laser beams that shot out randomly. Jake's team consisted of Kira, a quiet alien named Lorne, who had wriggling tentacles instead of arms, and several others who seemed equally skeptical of his abilities. Things went wrong almost immediately. When it was Jake's turn to climb a slippery wall, he slipped halfway up and landed flat on his back. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he lay there groaning as the rest of his team groaned in frustration. "We're doomed," muttered one of them under their breath. Kira rolled her eyes but reached down to help Jake up. "Come on," she said firmly. "You won't get anywhere lying there." With her encouragement, Jake tried again, and this time he managed to reach the top. It wasn't graceful, but it was enough to earn a nod of approval from Kira. As the team continued through the course, Jake found himself relying on Lorne's clever problem-solving skills and Kira's fearless leadership. Together, they made it to the final section, a maze filled with traps and alarms. Unfortunately, Jake messed up again. While attempting to deactivate a security drone, he accidentally triggered its sensors, causing it to fire warning shots and set off a chain reaction of alarms. The entire course lit up with flashing lights, and Commander Tarka stormed in, furious. "Who caused this disruption?" it demanded, glaring at the group. All eyes turned to Jake, who shrunk under the weight of the... Jake's third week at the Intergalactic Defense Academy was when things started to feel off. At first, it was small things, whispers among the recruits late at night, strange noises coming from distant parts of the facility, and the way some cadets would disappear for hours only to return looking pale and shaken. Jake tried to brush it off as paranoia or stress, but deep down he couldn't ignore the growing sense that something wasn't right. One evening, after another grueling day of training, Jake sat on his bunk tinkering with a small gadget he'd found in the mess hall. It was broken, but fixing things helped him relax. Kira walked over, her fiery orange hair tied back into a loose ponytail. She flopped onto the bunk next to him, letting out an exaggerated sigh. "You know," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening, "something weird is going on here." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Weird how? Besides the fact that we're stuck in alien boot camp." Kira leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I'm serious. Have you noticed how some recruits just vanish, and then they come back acting like they've seen a ghost?" Jake frowned. He had noticed, but he hadn't wanted to think too much about it. "Maybe they got sent on special missions or something," he suggested weakly. "Or maybe not," Kira replied, her green eyes narrowing. "I heard rumors about secret experiments happening below the academy. They say the Union isn't just training us, they're testing dangerous tech on cadets." Jake's stomach churned at the thought. "That sounds crazy. Why would anyone do that?" Kira shrugged. "Who knows, but I'm going to find out." She stood up and gave him a pointed look. "You coming?" Jake hesitated. Sneaking around the academy sounded like a terrible idea, one that could get them both in serious trouble. But curiosity tugged at him, and he didn't want to seem like a coward either. "Fine," he muttered, shoving the gadget into his pocket. "But if we get caught, I'm blaming you." The two of them waited until the barracks were quiet before slipping out into the dimly lit corridors. The academy felt eerily different at night, its usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling silence. Shadows stretched long across the walls, and every sound, the creak of metal, the distant whir of machinery, made Jake jump. Kira led the way, moving with confidence despite the darkness. She seemed to know exactly where she was going, which surprised Jake. "How do you know this place so well?" he whispered as they turned down another hallway. "I pay attention," she said simply. "And I talk to people. Turns out I'm not the only one who thinks something's wrong here." Eventually, they reached a heavy door marked with glowing red symbols. Kira pressed her hand against a panel beside it, and the door hissed open. Inside was a narrow staircase leading downward, spiraling into what looked like endless blackness. Jake swallowed hard. "Are you sure about this?" "Nope," Kira admitted with a smirk. "But that's never stopped me before." They descended cautiously, their footsteps echoing softly in the confined space. The air grew colder the deeper they went, and a faint mechanical hum began to fill the silence. When they finally reached the bottom, they found themselves in a sterile white corridor lined with doors. Each door had a small window, and through them, Jake could see rows of pods filled with strange liquid, and inside those pods, figures floated motionless. "What is this?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling. Kira peered through one of the windows, her expression grim. "Looks like they're experimenting on cadets. Those pods, they're probably used for genetic modifications or something worse." Jake felt sick. He wanted to turn around and run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. As they moved further down the corridor, they stumbled upon a room filled with monitors and data screens, files labeled Subject Trials and Experimental. Results flashed across the displays. Kira quickly pulled out a small device and began downloading the information onto it. "This could be our proof," she murmured. Just as she finished, a loud alarm blared overhead, startling them both. Red lights began flashing, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from somewhere nearby. "We need to go, now!" Kira shouted, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him toward the stairs. They raced back up the staircase, their hearts pounding as the footsteps grew louder behind them. When they burst into the main corridor, they nearly collided with Lorne, who had been waiting for them. His tentacles wriggled anxiously. "Hurry, they're coming!" The three of them sprinted toward the barracks, dodging patrols and ducking into alcoves whenever they heard voices approaching. By the time they made it back to their bunks, they were all out of breath and covered in sweat. Jake collapsed onto his bed, his mind racing with everything he'd seen. "What are we going to do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kira clenched her fists, determination burning in her eyes. "We expose them. Whatever it takes." But even as she said it, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that uncovering the truth would come at a price. One they might not be ready to pay. The next few days were tense for Jake, Kira, and Lorne. They kept their discovery a secret, knowing that revealing it too soon could put them all in danger. But the weight of what they'd seen lingered over them like a storm cloud, making it hard to focus on anything else. Training became even more brutal, with Commander Tarka pushing the recruits harder than ever before. Every drill felt like a test of survival, and every mistake was punished severely. Jake tried to act normal, but his mind kept drifting back to the pods and the files they had uncovered. He couldn't stop thinking about the figures floating inside those tanks. Were they cadets? Had they volunteered for this, or had they been forced into it? The questions haunted him, keeping him awake at night. Kira noticed his unease and often stayed up late talking to him, trying to keep his spirits up. "You're doing great," she told him one evening as they sat together in the corner of the barracks. "You've already come so far since your first day." Jake shook his head. "I don't feel like I'm doing great. Everyone else is stronger, faster, smarter. I'm just here." Kira gave him a sharp look. "That's not true. You're resourceful, and you think outside the box. Those are valuable skills, especially if we're going to take down the Union." Her words made Jake feel a little better, but he still doubted himself. Deep down, he wondered if he was cut out for any of this. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't fearless. He was just a kid who missed home and wished none of this had ever happened. Despite his doubts, Jake threw himself into training with renewed determination. He knew he needed to get stronger, not just for himself, but for the mission ahead. To his surprise, he started improving. During combat simulations, he began using his quick reflexes to dodge attacks and strike when opponents least expected it. In strategy drills, he worked closely with Lorne, whose calm demeanor and brilliant mind helped them devise clever plans that caught even Commander Tarka off guard. Lorne, for his part, proved to be an invaluable ally. Though quiet and reserved, he had a knack for analyzing situations and finding solutions no one else considered. His tentacles moved gracefully as he sketched diagrams in the dirt or adjusted settings on alien equipment. Over time, Jake came to trust Lorne completely, knowing that the soft-spoken alien would always have his back. As the group grew closer, tensions among the other recruits began to rise. Some cadets resented Jake and his friends for their growing success, while others whispered about joining forces to overthrow the oppressive regime of the academy. One recruit in particular stood out. Arik, a charismatic human teenager with slicked back hair and a cocky grin. Arik had arrived at the academy shortly after Jake and quickly earned a reputation for being charming and manipulative. He often hung around Jake's group, offering advice or cracking jokes, but there was something about him that didn't sit right with Kira. "He's trouble," she warned Jake during a rare moment alone. "I don't trust him." Jake shrugged. He hasn't done anything wrong. Besides, having another human around isn't such a bad thing. Kira frowned but didn't argue further. Still, her instincts proved correct sooner than anyone expected. One night, as Jake, Kira, and Lorne huddled in a hidden corner of the barracks discussing their next move, Arik appeared out of nowhere. "What are you guys up to?" he asked casually, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Caught off guard, Jake stammered, Nothing. Just talking." Arik smirked. "About those experiments you found, maybe?" The blood drained from Jake's face. "How do you know about that?" Before Arik could answer, Kira stepped forward, her voice icy. "If you tell anyone, we'll make sure you regret it." Arik held up his hands defensively. "Relax, I'm not going to say anything for now. But I want in. Whatever you're planning, count me in." Jake hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. But Kira intervened again, her tone firm. "No deal. We work alone." Arik's smile faded, replaced by a cold glare. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving the group uneasy and suspicious. The next morning, everything changed. As the recruits gathered for breakfast, Commander Tarka entered the dining hall accompanied by several guards. Its glowing red eyes scanned the room until they landed on Jake, Kira, and Lorne. "Step forward," it ordered, its voice booming like thunder. Fear gripped Jake as he realized what must have happened. Arik had betrayed them. Under heavy guard, the three were taken to a detention center deep within the facility. The cells were small and dark, lit only by faint blue lights embedded in the walls. Jake, Kira, and Lorne didn't stop running until they were far away from the academy. The night air was cool against their sweaty skin, and the distant hum of explosions faded as they put more distance between themselves and the chaos they had left behind. Their hearts pounded in rhythm with their footsteps, each breath sharp and ragged. They didn't speak. There was no time for words, only survival. Eventually, they reached a dense forest that bordered the academy grounds. Thick trees stretched high into the sky, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out most of the light. It was safer here, hidden from prying eyes, but it wasn't enough to make them feel secure. Jake glanced over his shoulder constantly, half expecting guards or drones to burst through the trees at any moment. "We can't stay here," Kira said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was low but firm, her green eyes scanning the shadows around them. "They'll send search parties soon." Lorne nodded, his tentacles twitching nervously. "Agreed. We need shelter and allies." Jake frowned. "Allies? Who's going to help us now? Everyone back there either hates us or wants us dead." Kira gave him a small, tired smile. "Not everyone. There are others who've escaped the academy before, rebels. If we can find them, maybe they'll join our fight." The idea of trusting strangers didn't sit well with Jake, but he knew they didn't have many options. They couldn't take on the Galactic Union alone. Not yet. Anyway, so after a brief rest, the trio pressed onward, following Kira's lead as she navigated the unfamiliar terrain. The journey was grueling. The forest floor was uneven, covered in roots and rocks that twisted underfoot. Insects buzzed loudly, biting at exposed skin, and the damp air clung to them like a second layer of clothing. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, but they dared not stop to eat. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made them freeze, fearing discovery. By the third day, exhaustion began to take its toll. Jake stumbled often, his legs heavy and sore from days of constant movement. Lorne moved slower too, his tentacles drooping slightly, as if weighed down by fatigue. Only Kira seemed unaffected, though even she showed signs of strain in the tightness of her jaw and the dark circles under her eyes. Finally, just as hope started to fade, they found what they were looking for. Hidden deep within the forest was a sprawling camp filled with makeshift shelters and scavenged equipment. Dozens of aliens milled about, some tending to fires while others worked on repairing weapons or vehicles. At first, the group was met with suspicion. Armed guards approached cautiously, weapons raised, demanding to know who they were and why they had come. Kira stepped forward, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "We're recruits from the academy," she explained quickly. "We escaped after uncovering the truth about their experiments. We need your help." For a moment there was silence. Then one of the guards, a tall, wiry alien with shimmering silver scales, lowered his weapon and gestured for them to follow. "Come with me," he said simply. The leader will want to hear this. They were led to a large tent at the center of the camp, where an older alien sat waiting. She introduced herself as Commander Vera, a former cadet who had fled the academy years ago after discovering its dark secrets. Her piercing yellow eyes studied Jake, Kira, and Lorne carefully as they recounted their story, leaving out no detail. When they finished, Vera leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. You've done well to get this far, she said at last. But exposing the Union won't be easy. They have resources, power, and influence. Taking them down will require more than courage. It'll take sacrifice. Jake swallowed hard. He had known the mission wouldn't be simple, but hearing it laid out so plainly made the enormity of it sink in. Still, he nodded. We're ready, he said, surprising even himself with how steady his voice sounded. Vera regarded him for a long moment before nodding. Good, because you'll need all the resolve you can muster. Over the next few days, the rebels helped the group prepare for their next move. They provided food, medical care, and training, teaching Jake and his friends how to use advanced alien technology and tactics. For the first time since arriving at the academy, Jake felt like he truly belonged. Somewhere, the rebels welcomed him as one of their own, treating him not as a weakling but as someone capable of making a difference. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, as the group gathered around a fire to discuss their plans, disaster struck. A patrol of Union soldiers ambushed the camp, catching everyone off guard. Chaos erupted as blaster fire lit up the darkness, sending the rebels scrambling for cover. Jake ducked behind a fallen log, his heart racing as he watched the battle unfold. Kira fought fiercely, wielding a stolen plasma rifle with precision, while Lorne used his tentacles to disable enemy drones with clever hacks. But despite their efforts, the rebels were outnumbered and outgunned. In the heat of the fight, Jake spotted Lorne pinned down by incoming fire. Without thinking, he grabbed a discarded energy shield and ran toward his friend, using it to block the blasts. Get up, he shouted, pulling Lorne to safety. But as they retreated, another wave of enemies closed in, cutting off their escape. Haupte. Lorne turned to Jake, his glowing eyes filled with determination. Go, he urged. I'll hold them off. No, Jake protested, shaking his head. We stick together. Lorne placed a gentle tentacle on Jake's shoulder. This is my choice. Trust me. Before Jake could argue further, Lorne darted back into the fray, firing wildly to draw attention away from the others. Tears blurred Jake's vision as he watched his friend disappear into the chaos. He wanted to run after him, but Kira grabbed his arm, dragging him toward the edge of the camp. We have to go, she yelled, her voice breaking. He gave us a chance. We can't waste it. Reluctantly, Jake followed, guilt weighing heavily on his chest. As they slipped into the forest, the sounds of battle fading behind them, he vowed to honor Lorne's sacrifice. Whatever happened next, he would fight harder than ever, not just for himself, but for everyone who had risked everything to stand against the Union. The loss of Lorne hit Jake harder than he expected. It wasn't just the pain of losing a friend, it was the weight of knowing that Lorne had sacrificed himself so they could survive. Every step Jake took felt heavier, every breath more labored. He wanted to stop, to turn back and fight, but Kira kept pushing him forward, her grip firm on his arm. We can't stay here, she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. Lorne gave us a chance. We have to use it. Jake nodded, blinking back tears. He didn't trust himself to speak. Instead, he focused on putting one foot in front of the other, letting Kira guide him through the dense forest. The night was eerily quiet now, the distant sounds of battle replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an alien bird. But even in the silence, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After hours of walking, they finally reached a hidden cave Kira had scouted earlier during their time with the rebels. It was small and damp, with jagged rocks lining the walls, but it offered some protection from the elements, and from anyone who might be hunting them. They huddled together inside, catching their breath and trying to process everything that had happened. Kira broke the silence first. We need to keep moving, she said, her voice low but resolute. If the Union finds this place, we're done for. Jake shook his head. I don't know if I can keep going. What's the point? We've lost everyone. Lorne, the rebels. Maybe we should just give up. Kira grabbed him by the shoulders, forcing him to look at her. Her green eyes burned with intensity. No, that's exactly what they want. To break us. If we quit now, then everything Lorne did will have been for nothing. Is that what you want? Jake hesitated. He didn't want to dishonor Lorne's memory, but the thought of facing the Union again filled him with dread. How could two teenagers take down an entire galactic organization? Before he could answer, Kira softened her tone. Look, I get it. This is hard. It's terrifying. But we're not alone. There are still people out there who believe in us. People like Vera and the rebels. We owe it to them to finish what we started. Her words struck a chord deep within Jake. She was right. Giving up wasn't an option, not after everything they'd been through. Slowly, he nodded. Okay. What do we do next? Kira pulled out the device she had used to download files from the Academy's secret lab. This is our ticket, she said, holding it up. These files prove what the Union is doing. If we can get them to the public, we can expose the truth. But how? Jake asked. Even if we manage to sneak off this planet, the Union controls everything. The networks, the media, the governments. They'll bury the story before anyone sees it. Kira smiled faintly. Not if we go big. There's a rebel outpost orbiting the planet, a station called Haven. It's heavily guarded, but if we can reach it, we can broadcast the files directly to the galactic network. Once the information is out there, they won't be able to cover it up. It was a risky plan, but Jake knew they didn't have any better options. All right, he said, squaring his shoulders. Let's do it. Getting to Haven wouldn't be easy. The outpost was located on a massive space station floating high above the planet, and reaching it meant stealing a ship. Unfortunately, the nearest landing pad was heavily patrolled by Union forces. Sneaking past them would require skill, luck, and a lot of improvisation. Under the cover of darkness, Jake and Kira made the Union cruisers closed in fast, their sleek hulls glinting menacingly under the light of a nearby star. Jake's stomach churned as he watched them approach, their weapons charging with an ominous hum. He glanced at Kira, who was gripping the controls so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her jaw was set in determination, but even she couldn't hide the flicker of fear in her eyes. We're not going down without a fight, she said through gritted teeth, flipping switches and adjusting dials on the ship's console. Brace yourself. Before Jake could respond, Kira yanked the throttle, sending the scout ship into a sharp dive. The sudden movement threw him against his seat, and he barely managed to grab onto the safety harness in time. Behind them, the cruisers opened fire, bright streaks of energy zipping past their ship like deadly rain. One blast clipped the rear engine, causing the entire vessel to shudder violently. Are you okay? Jake shouted over the noise, his voice barely audible above the alarms blaring inside the cockpit. I'm fine, Kira snapped, though her tone suggested otherwise. She twisted the ship sideways, narrowly avoiding another volley of shots. Just focus on helping me if I need it. Jake nodded, scanning the control panel for anything he might be able to assist with. Most of the buttons and levers were labeled in alien symbols he didn't understand, but he spotted a blinking red light near the top corner. It looked important, or dangerous, so he pointed it out to Kira. That's the shield generator, she explained quickly, tapping the light with one hand while steering with the other. If it goes out, we're done for. As if on cue, the light flashed more urgently, and the ship rocked again as another blast hit them. Sparks flew from the console, forcing Jake to duck instinctively. Smoke began filling the cabin, making it hard to breathe. Despite the chaos, Kira remained focused, weaving the ship through the enemy fire with incredible precision. They're trying to box us in, she yelled, jerking the controls to avoid a pair of cruisers that had moved to flank them. We need to break through or we'll never reach Haven. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't keep dodging forever, not with the ship already damaged and the cruisers closing in. Then he remembered something. The files they had risked everything to obtain were still stored on the device Kira carried. If they could transmit even part of the data now, maybe someone would pick it up before they were destroyed. "Kira," he shouted, leaning closer to her. "What if we try sending the files early? Even if it's just pieces of it, maybe someone will get the message." For a split second, Kira hesitated, her gaze darting between the console and the incoming ships. Then she nodded sharply. "Do it. Use the comm system. I'll keep us alive long enough." Jake fumbled with the small device, plugging it into the ship's communication port. His hands trembled as he worked, sweat dripping down his forehead. The interface was unfamiliar, but after a few tense seconds he managed to activate the transmission sequence. Lines of alien text scrolled across the screen as chunks of data were sent out into space. Transmission started, he called out, relief washing over him briefly. But the moment was short-lived. A massive explosion rocked the ship, throwing both of them forward. Smoke poured from the engine compartment, and warning lights blinked furiously all over the dashboard. "They hit the main engine," Kira cried, struggling to maintain control. "We're losing power." Jake's heart sank. Without power, they wouldn't be able to reach Haven or escape the cruisers. Desperation clawed at him, but then he noticed something on the radar screen. A cluster of asteroids floating nearby. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "Kira, look," he said, pointing at the screen. "We can use those asteroids for cover. Maybe lose them in the debris field." Kira's eyes widened as she followed his finger. "Good call," she muttered, steering the crippled ship toward the rocks. As they entered the asteroid field, the cruisers slowed slightly, wary of colliding with the jagged boulders. Kira used this to her advantage, zigzagging wildly between the asteroids and forcing the larger ships to fall behind. But the reprieve was temporary. One cruiser managed to slip past the obstacles, positioning itself directly in their path, its massive cannons charged ominously, ready to deliver the final blow. Jake clenched his fists, bracing for impact. This was it, the end of the line. But then, unexpectedly, a loud boom echoed through the cockpit, and the cruiser exploded in. A brilliant burst of light. Stunned, Jake and Kira stared at the wreckage, unsure what had happened. A new ship emerged from the shadows, a sleek, battered vessel with rebel insignias painted on its side. It fired again, taking out another cruiser, before broadcasting a message over the comm system. "This is Commander Vera. Hold tight, we're bringing you home." Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as he realized they weren't alone anymore. The rebels had come for them. With renewed hope, Kira guided their damaged ship toward Haven, flanked protectively by the rebel fleet. Together, they broke through the remaining Union forces and docked safely at the outpost. Once aboard Haven, Jake and Kira wasted no time uploading the rest of the files to the Galactic network. Within hours, the incriminating evidence spread like wildfire, sparking outrage across the galaxy. News outlets picked up the story, exposing the Union's crimes to billions of beings. Protests erupted on multiple planets, demanding accountability and reform. For the first time in weeks, Jake allowed himself to feel a sense of victory. They had done it. They had exposed the truth. But as he stood beside Kira, watching the news reports flood in, he knew their fight was far from over. The Union wouldn't go down without a fight, and there would be consequences for what they had done. Still, for now, they had won, and that was enough. The days following the exposure of the Galactic Union's secrets were a whirlwind for Jake. News of the experiments and unethical practices spread like wildfire across the galaxy, sparking outrage on countless planets. Images of the floating pods and classified files dominated every screen, and protests erupted in major cities, demanding justice and reform. The Union scrambled to respond, issuing statements that rang hollow against the overwhelming evidence. For once, they weren't in control. Haven buzzed with activity as rebels worked tirelessly to coordinate the next steps. Commander Vera called a meeting to discuss their strategy moving forward. Jake and Kira sat among the group, feeling both proud and exhausted. They had done what seemed impossible. They had shaken the foundations of one of the most powerful organizations in the galaxy. But victory came at a cost. The faces of those they had lost weighed heavily on Jake's mind. Lorne's sacrifice haunted him the most. He replayed the moment over and over in his head, wishing he could have done something, anything, to save his friend. Kira noticed his quiet sadness and placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll honor him," she said softly, "by finishing what he helped us start." Jake nodded, blinking back tears. "I just wish he could see this." Kira didn't respond, but her silence was enough. They both knew there was no time to dwell on the past. The fight wasn't over yet. A few weeks later, Jake returned to Earth. The journey home was bittersweet. On one hand, he was eager to reunite with his family after months of uncertainty. On the other hand, he worried about how much he had changed and whether they would understand. As the shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, he gazed out the window at the familiar blue-green planet below. It felt strange to think of it as home now. After everything he'd seen and done, Earth seemed smaller somehow, quieter. When he stepped off the shuttle, his mom and dad rushed toward him, tears streaming down their faces. Lily clung to their mom's leg, staring at Jake wide-eyed as if she couldn't believe he was real. For a moment, all the fear, anger, and loneliness melted away. He hugged them tightly, savoring the warmth of their embrace. But even as he laughed and answered their questions about where he'd been, he couldn't shake the feeling that part of him no longer belonged here. Life at home was different. His parents tried to act like nothing had changed, encouraging him to go back to school and hang out with his old friends. But Jake found it hard to relate to them anymore. How could he explain what he had been through? How could he make them understand that he wasn't the same kid who had left? At night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Kira and the rebels. He wondered how they were doing, whether the Union had managed to recover from the scandal. Occasionally, he received messages from Haven, updates on the ongoing investigations and efforts to dismantle the corrupt systems within the Academy. Each message reminded him of the life he had left behind and the people who still needed him. One evening, as he sat alone in his room flipping through a comic book, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Kira. "They're rebuilding," the text read. "The Union is trying to spin the story, blaming rogue officers instead of taking responsibility. We need your help." Jake stared at the screen, his heart pounding. He knew what she was asking. She wanted him to leave Earth again to join the fight once more. Part of him wanted to say no, to stay safe and try to rebuild his old life. But another part of him, the part that had grown stronger during his time in the stars, knew he couldn't turn away. "I'll be there," he replied simply. His parents weren't thrilled when he told them he was leaving. They begged him to reconsider, arguing that he deserved a break after everything he'd be.